Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's nice to see so many people interested in what we're doing. Just a couple of things. I'm hoping that everyone on this call has seen the publications that we sent out and put on our website on the 27th. We've got the experts here to go through the fees, but I'd also like to take this opportunity for all the individual obligated producers, the trade and the material sectors who've really helped us, given up their time to work with the analysts and the modelers to make sure that we have confidence in these fees, that they are robust, and they will form the basis of the invoices that we send out. So I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved, both formally and informally, to getting the base fees at this point. At this point, I will pass over to Jake, who will start going through the base fees for you.
Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Hi, everyone. I'm Jake. I lead on the sort of local authority modelling, which feeds into the base fees calculation. So if we move on to the first slide, I'm going to take you through a bit of the modelling and the technical side of that. We'll start by looking at on the next slide. So these are the finalised base fees that you will have all seen recently published. Hopefully nothing new to you, but we just wanted to include them here so that you can see those. These are formulated by the model that I'll talk about on the next slide. That'll be the next couple. So this is the basic equation that we use to calculate the base fees, which hopefully a lot of you are familiar with. It's a relatively simple equation that we repeat over each of the 8 material EPR categories. So we start with the costs of managing local authority packaging waste across the UK for each material, and that's calculated on both a weight basis, but also by volume, depending on where in the system those two metrics are most important, and depending on the different materials and the densities they have. We then subtract off the revenues made from selling these materials in order to get a net cost. And then finally added to that are sort of some other additional costs, such as running costs for PackUK. All of that gives us sort of a total amount of money that we need for EPR, and then that's divided by the weight of packaging placed on the market as reported to the report packaging data portal, and therefore the total costs are split proportionally amongst the different materials. And we also do some analysis to add in certain missing tonnages, for instance, from sort of lack of reporting, that sort of thing. And then for the first year of EPR, so in the 2025 base fees, we are using our final modelled scenario for 2025-6 local authority disposal costs, which, as I've said, is based on both weight and volume, and that's the first part of that equation. And then we are using packaging tonnage data submitted to the RPD portal for the full 2024 year as of the 9th of June, again, with those adjustments. So I'll now move on to talk a bit about the model which gives us that first element of the equation, the local authority costs. But just to make it clear, this model will be updated each year, so it's likely that the base fees are going to change year on year. So this is a rather simplified diagram of the model, and I won't go into full detail. There is going to be some guidance published alongside our local authority notifications that people can read if they want to know more about the model in more detail. But the basic purpose of the model, as I've mentioned, is that we needed a total cost for managing all of the packaging in the UK. So that's across every local authority. We needed to know how much each local authority spends on packaging so that we could give them their payments. And we also needed to know how that cost was split by materials so that we could charge the correct amount to the correct material. I will zoom in on a couple of little bits of the model that are maybe of interest. So obviously on the left hand, we combine some sort of information about what activities local authorities undertake. So do they collect different materials and how they collect them? We combine that with sort of local authority reported data on waste tonnages, and that gives us tonnages of material collected and disposed of. And then another interesting area at the top is how we get cost data. So they were in the absence of a UK-wide source of local authority cost data, we had to come up with a solution. And the solution we came up with was to sample a subset of local authorities. And we then use a groupings approach where local authorities are grouped into groups with local authorities that have similar characteristics to them, and then they receive a cost amount of similar to the local authorities in the group with them. We then use similar cost data for our disposal costs to give us an overall cost, and then we apply our bulk densities to make adjustments, as I mentioned, for where volume is a more important factor than weight, and that, for instance, is most impactful in our dry recycling curbside waste collections, as noted in the bottom right. And that gives us those final outputs that we need to calculate the base fees and to calculate local authority payments. If we move on to the next slide, this is a bit of a look at how we made sure the model was fit for purpose, accurate, and free of error. And so the top 3 bullet points look at our sort of internal team processes. So we've designed our team, our coding team, and our analysts in accordance with the PackUK book, which is a fairly well-known document in government, which it's a reference book for producing quality analysis in government. That is available on the internet if anyone wants to go and read through that. It might make some interesting bedtime reading. But we've embedded the processes from that document into our team. That includes comprehensive documentation of the model. We do version controlling of the code through GitHub, and also we have a code review system where every team member's contribution to the model are reviewed by other team members. We've also had a few different stakeholders who have advised us on our internal processes. So the first is the Government Actuaries Department, who are a government leading authority on modelling and quality assurance, and they've done a review of our processes for both the local authority cost model and the base fees calculations. And they've advised a number of steps we should take to improve our processes, which we have implemented. And we also have an analytical board made up of senior analysts across the 4 nations who have been able to sign off that we are producing good quality analysis. Bottom half of this slide looks at the actual model design itself and how we've informed that. And so we have a number of technical working groups where experts from both the waste management and packaging sector have helped us to decide what assumptions and model design choices we've made throughout the modelling process. And we have also engaged widely with the wider industry and the wider local authorities in the UK. So as you can see, we had a series of 7 roundtables, one for each material type in late 2024. And then we had some follow-up sessions in April this year, where we discussed evidence that had been submitted after those roundtables and how we wanted to incorporate that into our modelling, which we have now done. And we also had over 200 responses from local authorities with their thoughts and feedback and evidence on modelling and where it could be improved, which again, we've gone through all of that and we've come up with ways of improving the model based on it, and we've implemented a lot of those for these June payments. Finally, we have a lot of internal validation tools. So we have a whole suite of data visualizations and documents and outputs that we can use to make sure that our outputs are representative of reality, and we frequently share those with independent experts who can ensure that they are up to spec. I'm going to hand over to Martina to talk about the base fees further, but I just wanted to note before I do that a lot of the changes in the base fees have been as a result of these processes. So, finding areas of the model where we can improve them based on quality assurance, and that's led to a lot of the changes we've seen. So I'll hand over to Martina.
Thank you very much, Jake. Good morning, everyone. I'm Martina Adifonso. I'm a lead operational research analyst working in the fees and payments calculator team. I'll now go through why fees differ across materials. Next slide, please. Thanks. So there are a few key reasons why fees differ. So first of all, this is because costs vary across materials, and this is presented in the figure to the right. LA costs vary due to the proportion of materials in the recycling and the residual streams varying across materials. A further contributing factor is the fact that denser materials have lower collection costs in curbside dry recycling. And finally, the revenues generated from the sale of recyclates are subtracted from the costs. And since some materials have higher values than others, this further impacts the calculation of costs across materials. The second main reason why fees vary across materials is due to placed on market tonnages varying across materials, which are also presented in the figure to the right. Next slide, please. The third reason for differences in fees is due to differences in the waste arising tonnages and placed on market tonnages across materials. And we expect these differences to occur due to losses in the waste system, due to changes in material properties between packaging and waste, and finally, due to variation between the data sources used for RPD data and waste arisings. However, due to the uncertainty stemming from waste composition data for certain materials, we adjusted fiber-based composite, wood, and other waste arising tonnages to align to the placed on market tonnages reported in the RPD. And we viewed these to be more accurate for these materials. So as an example of the uncertainties that we identified was a misalignment between category definitions, especially affecting those materials with lower tonnages. And we continue to improve our data inputs as we continue to progress our calculations, including using improved waste composition studies, which are currently underway. Next slide, please. So when we compare the UK base fees to international fees, we recognize that the UK fees are generally on the higher side. However, this is not always in all cases. For example, Sweden's pEPR fees are all higher than the UK fees with the exception of glass. The reasons for these differences can be explained. Most countries do not cover residual waste management costs as the UK does, thus increasing the fees in the UK. Waste management practices also differ across countries. For example, in Germany, there has been a well-established DRS scheme since 2003, which covers most of glass costs. Furthermore, a number of countries also have public bring-back collection points, which reduce waste collection costs. Thirdly, modulation is already active in many countries, reducing the fees for more recyclable materials already. The general costs of running waste management services will differ across different countries, further contributing to differences in fees. Next slide, please. I'll now go through why have fees changed over our progressive publications. So when we compare the 2025 fees with past publications, these are all within the ranges of previously published illustrative base fees. When we compare them specifically to those published in December, generally the base fees have fallen, ranging from a reduction in 8% for other packaging to a 39% reduction in fees for aluminium. The exception to this is fiber-based composites, which have increased by 1%. Next slide, please. For each release, we've used the best data sources available at the time to calculate fees. And the following table lists the different data sources showing how we've moved. In the case of packaging tonnages, we've moved from estimates in our early publications to using actual data in our June publication based on the 2024 reported data on the RPD system. And for disposal cost, we've progressively used improved versions of DEFRA's local authority packaging cost and performance model, with the June model being based on the fully quality assured final model scenario for 25-26 of total local authority disposal costs. Next slide, please. And there have been some general changes in LA costs and place on market tonnages since the December fees. So specifically, there's been a 13% increase in the overall packaging tonnages placed on the market compared to what we had predicted in December. There has been changes to the way we estimate tonnages of missing from late reporter producers, and this will be covered in later slides. There's been a decrease in LA costs due to adjusting our inflation assumptions. There's also been a 1% increase in PackUK administrative costs and a 9% reduction in PackUK communication costs used in the June fees. And I'll now be handing over to Katie to cover more specific changes since December. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm one of the lead operational researchers working on LAPCAP, the model that calculates local authority costs with a bit more of a kind of materials focus in my work. So there've been a lot of changes since December. As Jake described, some of these are due to us going through our quality assurance process and kind of aligning with best practice. We've also made changes in response to local authority feedback, and additionally made changes where producers have provided evidence that we felt was kind of fit to use for year one and sufficiently evidence to make those changes. For example, for aluminium, we see a decrease in the base fee, which is largely led by the increase in our bulk density assumptions, which were as a result of stakeholder engagement. And additionally, for glass, we see a decrease in modelled costs that is partially driven by an increase in the material values used in the rebate calculations. This doesn't give the whole picture because there are also changes that have impacted every material category equally. And so we see kind of some decreases, some increases through various changes. But this is a bit of a summary of where we see those differences between the impacts on different materials. Next slide, please. And I'll be handing over to David.
Yes, thanks, Katie. I'm David Tennyson. I'm operational researcher here in DEFRA as well, working on analysing the RPD data and the tonnages reported. And I'll be going through the tonnages that we've used to calculate the fees and how we've adjusted those. So next slide, please. So producers have been reporting their data into the RPD system for the 2024 reporting year. And we took an extract on the 9th of June to calculate these fees. The tonnages that are liable for the fees are those which are calculated that are labelled as household packaging and those that are labelled as packaging that is commonly binned, with the exception for glass, where we also include household drinks containers. The packaging data that we used represents the sort of most reasonably accurate data that we have at the moment for estimating those fees. And the regulators are continuing their data checks of these data. Next slide, please. So I want to emphasize that the quality of the data that we have has massively improved since December, and that's through a combined work of both the regulators and also through industry really engaging with the system. So we'd like to thank you for really making sure that the quality of data that you submit into the system is really, really good. However, to ensure that the invoices and the fees that we produce are as accurate as possible, we have estimated some missing tonnage. So that's due to reporters who have reported late. But we expect that tonnage to come into the system by the end of the year due to the work of compliance work by the regulators. This is to avoid overcharging producers for packaging that they are not liable for. So we've identified 3 main sources of missing tonnage. Those are producers who are only submitted partial data for the year, so for H1 but not H2, or H2 but not H1. We've also estimated packaging from producers who submitted in, say, 2023, but did not submit their 2024 data. And we also estimate packaging from free riders. So those are producers who we believe are liable, but have not submitted any data into the system. Now, while we've taken a really granular approach to this to ensure that our data is as accurate as possible, we want to emphasize that the adjustments we make are very small. The estimates that we have for these different categories vary between 0.7% and 2%. And in total, we've added 4.3% of missing tonnage to the RPD data when calculating these fees. So the adjustments are still very small. And the quality of the data that we do have in the system is very good. Next slide, please. So the way that we estimated the tonnage from the dropouts, both the H1, H2 dropouts and the 2024 dropouts, are roughly the same. We take the data that we do have for them and we scale that up depending on how the reporting changes between the different periods. So for example, the H2 dropouts, we take the data from H1 and we scale that depending on how general reporting trends have changed between the second half of the year and the first half of the year. Then for the 2024 dropouts, we do a similar thing. We take that 2023 data and we scale that depending on how general reporting trends have changed between 2024 and 2023. Next slide, please. For the free riders, those who've not submitted any data, we've taken, we sort of split it between English free riders and the other 3 nations across the UK. For English free riders, we take the average tons across all producers in the UK, and we scale that down to represent the fact that mostly producers who report late report much less packaging than those who report on time. So that really scales down our estimation of those missing tons. And we multiply that by the estimated number of free riders that we believe are out there, and those numbers come from work that we do with the regulators. Similarly, for the other 3 nations, we take the average tons across the whole of the UK and we scale that down because producers from those 3 nations report much less packaging on average than UK-wide. And so we do a similar thing, but just scale them down to represent the average packaging from those countries. Next slide, please. We do make some other adjustments into the data. We don't really class this as missing tonnage because this is data that has been submitted into the RPD system, but is missing some points just for technical reasons, perhaps. So some producers submit data for less than 6 months in the first half of the year. Those producers have had their data scaled up to represent the equivalent amount for 6 months. We also have some producers who have submitted their packaging data but have not registered into the system, and we've included those packaging data into the total calculation on the assumption those producers are liable. And finally, there are some pieces of data that are rejected by the regulators. We've split those into 2 categories: data submitted by compliance schemes and data that has been submitted by direct reporters. We've included any data that's been rejected but has been submitted by a compliance scheme under the assumption that most of this data is still pretty robust. And we've come to that conclusion with work with the regulators. But data from direct reporters that has been rejected by the regulators has not been included in our calculations under the assumption that it is not robust enough for these calculations.
For those who don't know me, my name's Peter. I'm the head of fees, payments and operations within PackUK. I'm going to kind of turn us on to what comes next. Obviously, the focus thus far has been on the year 1 base fees and payments. Can we have the next slide, please? So this slide covers some of the work that we're going on in the modelling of cost for local authorities as we move towards year 2. I'm not going to go through it line by line because I'm confident most people can read. But the overarching intent of the work over the next few months is to drive quality in the model, building on the information that's being made available, incorporating some of the changes in policy across the 4 nations, for example, simple recycling in England, but the equivalents in the devolved governments, and also further external scrutiny. So the team mentioned earlier that the model had been subject to a review from the Government Actuaries Department. There are plans to repeat that to drive up the quality as high as possible to make sure that the model is as robust as it can be for year 2 payments. Can we move on to the next slide again, please? Thank you. There's a bit more on this slide, so I'll go slightly slower. I'll say at the outset, I know one of the things that a lot of people have asked is, how do I pay? I won't go into the huge details here, but I will promise that there will be guidance and communications coming out from PackUK soon on this, and in advance of the notice of liability going in October. I'm not going to set a date on this webinar, because when I do set a date, I want to be one that we will hit, and I'm not currently in a position to do that. But I will say that when guidance goes out on how to pay and the information around your notice of liability, there will be direct communications to registered producers to make sure the information does land, so that you have as much transparency over what you will have to do as possible. I'm also going to steal the joke that you may have heard from Margaret Bates a few times. If you are worried about how to pay, don't be. We are clearly very invested in supporting you in making payments within pEPR. I'll then kind of look a bit towards the future of the scheme. So year 1 base fees, as we kind of discussed today, are defined by cost. As we move towards year 2, we will be looking into implementing fee modulation. It's been hinted at already on some of the slides, but the fee modulation is going to be based on recyclability. Hopefully, everybody here knows what the recyclability assessment methodology, or the RAM, is. But around it, I'm going to draw you to 2 specific documents. Firstly, as Becky highlighted earlier, the regulators published regulatory position statements, or in Wales, a regulatory decision around the requirements and the enforcement approach they will take to reporting against the RAM for the H1 window in October, where in simple terms, if you do not report against the H1 window, they will not normally take enforcement action against you if you do not do the RAM report. You will still have to do the rest of your reporting. And to be clear, this does not affect the requirement to split some of plastic into subcategories of flexible and rigid. It only applies to reporting against the RAM. And it also doesn't change the requirements to report against the RAM for the H2 window in April 2026. The other document I'll point your attention to is the modulation policy statement published by PackUK on gov.uk. This highlights the modulation factors we'll be applying into years 2, 3 and 4 of the scheme, which are 1.2, 1.6 and 2 for those 3 years, and that'll be the multiplier applied to the red base fee. That's also a point I'll pause, and I've seen those questions around when will we have clarity on the fees for year 2 of the scheme. The answer is we are constrained by the lack of modulation data at the moment. So we fully understand the need to be as transparent as early as possible on next year's fees, but we want them to be right. Incorrect fees help nobody. And so I would heartily encourage you, if you are able to report against the RAM when it comes to your October report, to do so. The more high quality data we get in October, the earlier we're able to give you clarity on what the fees will be when we factor in modulation next year, particularly on the green side, where it's dependent on the amount of red packaging reported. I will move us finally onto the last slide, so we can move on, please. I'll finish with a timeline slide. It's quite a busy slide, so I'm not going to walk you through every step on it, and it's not complete. There are other things on here that can be on here. You will see this on the recording, so you will be able to look back at it then. There are a few dates coming up. The first one on there is the requirement to report data by the 1st of October for the first 6 months of this year. The next ones are around the invoices, which will be landing, or notice of liabilities, as they will be called, which will be landing in October, and the first payments going out to local authorities in November. Once the notice of liability does land in October, there's 50 days to make a payment or to set up quarterly payments to PackUK. But as I said earlier, there will be more communications on this before we get to October, so you have absolute confidence in what you will be needing to do then.